not here, when noise was everywhere. It tolled, increasingly like a bell, names in my ears of all the lost adventurers, my peers. How such a one was strong, and such was bold, and such was fortunate, yet each of old, lost. One moment knelled the woe of years. Robert Browning. Child Roland to the dark tower came. Majora's Mask, Chapter 62, Broken Promise. The bitter wind of Ikana Canyon carried only dust and death, dry as the desolate plain it called home. Though the cave steam had returned, its water held little power. The cloudy sky grumbled but gave them no rain. The canyon wind stirred the hollow shells of abandoned buildings and shattered dreams. It chilled Tattle. From the steam's reflection, she couldn't see her face. Her protective barrier was bright against the gloomy background. She watched it shimmer in the gentle current from the colorful house's porch. She sat beside the turning water wheel with the locked door at her back. The carnival song kept playing, even though the Gibdos were long gone.
I'd smash those bells in if I wasn't afraid of the undead coming back,
she thought. It wasn't an enjoyable tune. For such a bleak region, they'd had pretty good luck so far. Link had freed the spirit, befriended the old woman, returned the stream, and banished the Gibdos, but still, any happiness those accomplishments might have brought was quick to fade. In a land where the undead roamed, the living weren't welcome, and that always was a presence they felt.
I don't want to stay here any longer than we have to, Tattle thought. Let's talk to the king, go to the tower, and free the last giant. Our luck won't last.
Though there wouldn't be any rest on the other side of Ikana, only their final battle with a demon. Tattle shifted on the wooden porch, stretching her wings. Link was inside Shade's nearby shack eating soup, and Epona was roaming freely around the plain after eating some carrots. The steed lapped water from the stream or toyed with scantly growing grass.
That old woman's going to watch her while we're gone.
Compared to Epona's survival of the fisherman's treatment, there wouldn't be anything to worry about with Shade. Tattle had taken some soup herself, but apparently she was the only person stressed enough about Ikana to have an upset stomach.
We're very, very close to the edge of Termina, she thought, where the darkness and the ashes play tricks on our minds.
She still remembered the day the Skull Kid had dragged her through that cave.
Shadows are supposed to forget, she thought. Why can't I forget that?
The little boy was looking up at her again, and he was as terrified as her.
I just want to go home,
he'd said, as sprawled out as he'd been. She told herself that he was just a trick of the cave. That's what the Skull Kid had told her.
But the voices were saying other things. They said I was nothing, that if he was nothing, so was I, and the darkness is everywhere.
His screams had been real enough.
Stop!
Tattle squeezed her eyes shut, flying off the porch. She'd been able to shut out the memory for so long now. Why was it bothering her then?
Because our journey is almost over, she thought. And it's the one thing I haven't told Link about.
But they had so much to worry about already, so she wouldn't bother him with this. Tattle only wished she knew if the boy had been real. The only person with that answer, though, was the Skull Kid, and he likely had nothing to say she would want to hear. She turned to the moon, which still bore down on everything.
The cycle will be halfway up by nightfall.
Though that was still a long way from now, the sun was at its zenith. Tattle turned to see Epona buzzing her lips again. Water sloppily dripped from them.
Can I borrow some of your bliss?
She asked. The horse replied by bending back to the stream and drinking more.
Yeah, I thought so.
She flew to the hut nearest the colorful house and tossed the curtain aside. Link sat alone at a small table crammed in the corner, sipping at a spoonful of soup. The old woman wasn't there. A counter was the only other thing capable of fitting in the shack's first room, as the walls and ceiling were close to caving in. A curtain separated them from the back room, and Tattle knew the faceless woman was there cooking or concocting some spell.
Did she show you her face yet?
Tattle asked. Speckled light flashed through the hut's holes as clouds passed over the sun. The room creaked in the bitter wind.
Or lack thereof.
Link shook his head, returning the spoon to the rich brown meal. As mad and crazy as the alleged shade might be, her cooking was somewhat decent.
I don't blame her, he said. No eyes, nose, face, ears, or mouth? Nothing?
Nope. Not except for the red dot on her forehead.
Link turned to the curtain, as if afraid shade might come bursting out that moment.
You're eating her soup, Link,
Tattle thought.
You'd be dead by now if that's what she wanted.
I wonder why she showed it to you,
Link said.
Unless she wanted to scare you.
Well, it worked,
Tattle said.
I about pooped my pants.
You don't wear pants, Tattle.
The fairy scoffed.
I thought we agreed to keep whether or not I was wearing clothes ambiguous.
Ambiguous to who? It's just me and you.
I don't have any of that nasty stuff you do,
she said.
I don't need pants.
Link shook his head.
Well, if I didn't have a face, I'd keep my hood up too.
He stood from the old wooden chair to place the old wooden bowl on the old wooden counter. Everything in the room seemed to be gray.
I wouldn't want everyone I talk to pooping their pants, and I definitely wouldn't want people without pants pooping.
This conversation is getting weird,
Tattle said.
Did you want to talk about something else?
Tattle's confidence faltered.
Yeah. But can we go outside?
The two companions passed into the outside world of Ikana Canyon. The wind was quick to sting them.
Again.
You okay?
Link asked.
Yeah, I just...
She trailed off, wondering what to say. The little boy flashed across her mind.
No, not him.
She'd never told Link about that, but she'd come close when the Tektites had almost killed them.
I told him half the truth, but not all of it.
She told him the part that mattered, hadn't she?
Why is this bothering me right now? The edge of Termina? Or is that little girl in the music box house reminding me of him?
She kind of looked like him. Maybe they were related. Tattle glanced to see Link still looking at her worriedly.
It's the edge of Termina,
she said.
Cop-out answer,
she thought, even though it wasn't true.
It does more than play tricks on us. It unnerves me, Link. I don't like being this close to the edge.
She remembered Link telling her about the masked salesman's father and how he went crazy after going to Hyrule.
Is that what he thinks of when I remind him I'm a shadow? Will I start begging him to go back to Clocktown if we stay here too long?
Tattle didn't know the answer to those questions.
And I'm okay with that.
If their adventure had taught her one thing, it was that the answers were just as bad, if not far worse, than the questions. Link looked over to the ancient castle of Ikana, which would soon be their destination.
I can feel it too, but not as strongly as in Woodfall.
That's because you're not a shadow, Link. Trust me. When we were in the forest, I was uneasy long before you were.
Link nodded. He turned to look above the hut on the elevated land behind it. A ramp led from the plain to a balcony of sorts, where there was a well. It was small and unassuming, but she knew better.
Sharp, the spirit who tried to murder him, warned him about going in there.
She wondered if the captain's hat and the Garrow's mask would be enough power to get them through there.
How many more undead masks can we get?
Did I ever tell you about the well in Kakariko Village?
Link asked.
Kaka who now?
Kakariko,
Link said, smiling.
As long as I can keep making him smile, we'll be okay.
Tuttle thought.
You might have mentioned it once, but I don't remember if you told me the whole story.
Link's gaze shifted elsewhere as the memory overtook him.
When I was an adult, because time travel, I found Kakariko Village burning to the ground. An invisible monster was throwing Zelda around. It charged after me next and almost killed me. Before coming here, it was the closest I'd ever been to death. The monster came out of the well. Finding it and killing it took me through a place a lot like this one. All kinds of undead things. Except underground and dark. It comes number 2 in Scariest Adventures, second to the cave in Snowhead.
Tattle frowned.
It's upsetting how many awful things from Hyrule are number 2 on your list now after Termina, since this place turned out to be such a cesspit of despair.
My adventure in Hyrule had a lot of battles, fighting, and death, but it was nothing compared to this place.
A realm of darkness.
Yeah.
Tattle paused.
Was it confusing going back and forth between 10 and 17?
Link raised an eyebrow.
Of all the details from that story, that's the one you care about?
Going in and out of puberty over and over again sounds like torture,
She said.
assuming you weren't a late bloomer or an early one.
It was strange, going from being a kid to an adult constantly, though, once again,
He smiled.
it comes in second place. Termina had me turned into a Deku scrub, a Goron, and a Zora, not to mention a raging lunatic with purple eyes. Becoming an altogether different species totally beats hyperspeed puberty.
Tattle laughed.
Well, don't hold your breath just yet. We found a transformation mask in every region so far, so most likely we'll find one here, right? Maybe you'll be a redhead by the end of the day.
The poisonous look Link shot her was only half kidding.
You'd better stop jinxing us.
Or what? You'll smite me with your fire arrows?
She flew closer to him, her face skewed in a half smile.
Is that it, Mr. Hero?
Link smiled, with his face close to hers. The moment lingered between them, and then something much sadder flashed across his expression. Link shrunk away.
What's wrong?
She asked.
Nothing.
He said, although that was clearly not the case. Link shook his head and walked away abruptly. The clouds were a mad ocean above them, becoming angrier with every minute.
The second day storm.
She watched Link trek into the empty plain, fractured by a mountain stream. The boy grew smaller and smaller, and in his absence, the fear returned.
The darkness. The wasteland.
Link sat at the cliff's edge. Ikana's western roadway was far below him, bordered by a stronger river now that the cave stream had resurrected the waterfall. The ice octo was long gone, and the Wolfos corpse remained abandoned. He felt like a bird so high up. He wondered if Shade had felt that way too, when she saw two strangers traveling along the road. The sky grumbled with a storm. The music box house's tune echoed far and wide, and the stream and small waterfall splashed beneath it all. Tattle had not followed him. He looked back to see her floating absently around the colorful home's porch, as if unsure where to go.
What happened?
Link thought.
One moment, it was just like always, and then
the masked salesman had taken over. A memory of Navi that was not his own had flooded to the surface. A phantom instinct to love a dead woman won. These past couple days, the dark sorcerer's fading memories had transformed into something much more sinister, a subtle thread weaving into his own thoughts and experiences. Tattle became Navi far too often now.
But what else did I expect?
He'd relived a life where Navi had been his one true love, even if those feelings weren't his. Link sighed, filling his hands with his hair as he leaned forward. It was all so confusing. A realm of shadows, another man's life becoming his own, Hyrule doomed to drown, a demon threatening to break free of Termina, a powerful mask out there somewhere in the hands of a murderer, a crone, a devil, an undead king.
My head hurts.
The masked salesman's memories may have answered almost all their questions, but they had come at such a high cost.
And those answers haven't helped us yet.
Link thought.
They just make things worse.
Especially if the masked salesman's ghost caused him to have feelings for a fairy who was dead. Link forced himself to stop thinking.
Just look at the water.
He did. It was dirty, just as brown now as the rest of the canyon. He felt the pre-storm gales tussling his bangs. He pulled some loose clay into his hands, rough but dark, warm in its decades baked by the sun. He shifted the rocks through his fingers, feeling their coarse edges as he let them fall back to the ground. Thankfully, the masked salesman's memories did become a little quieter.
Should I tell Tattle about them?
Link thought.
Would that make things weird?
He wondered how much time had passed sitting there, probably more than he thought. Link stood, trying to find the sun to gauge their remaining time, but there were too many clouds.
Probably around 1.
He reasoned. They were making good time. The only thing they'd likely have to sacrifice was a good night's sleep.
Maybe we can have a break cycle after this one, Link thought. Before the final battle, we've definitely earned another stay at the...
That was when he saw the Skull Kid. Link froze. The imp stood in the middle of the desolate plain, his wide-brimmed hat and frayed clothing stirring in the deadly wind. His small eyes and beak were still hidden from the world. There was only Majora's mask. Its orange eyes bore into him, glowing as the moon's did far above. Link's skin prickled. The Skull Kid was still as a statue, wielding killer's eyes across the ancient battlefield. The colorful house, shacks, and stream were behind the imp. Tattle and Epona had yet to see the intruder for themselves. The Skull Kid clenched his fists. Link opened his mouth to say something, but the evil child interrupted him with a spell. The first of the purple fire came to life. Violet waves of heat came for the boy, a dark song scorching the clay black as it reached its target. Link allowed himself one deep breath to steady himself. Then he barrel-rolled away from the fire. It blew over the cliff and curled into nothingness. When Link returned to his feet, the imp had already extended his arms for more magic. The ground yielded to Majora's will and opened up beneath the boy. Link tried to jump away, but his next step met air. He fell into the newly created fissure, sliding into the separated rock walls as they began to close back together. The clay found his body of soft flesh and bone easy to crush.
No!
He thought, overwhelmed with panic. As the world surrendered to a terrible red blur, Link somehow slipped his hand into his bag. When the Goron mask went over his face, the rock walls had a new foe to contend with. He curled into a ball even as the closing cliffs scraped against his soft stomach. Once he was wrapped in his mountainous shell, Link felt the cliffs straining to obey the imp, and the pressure eventually became too great. Darmani shot out of the ground like an arrow. The wound in the ground closed itself immediately as Link spun high through the air in a ball. Goron Link spun toward the imp to crush him, but the Skull Child dodged the mountain creature, who crashed into the ground instead and left a crater. Link stood from his rocky sphere, immediately noticing a lot of water rise from the stream, circling the imp as it became another weapon.
Skull Kid!
Tattle shouted. The Goron turned to see his fairy horror-stricken, watching from the music box house.
Stop, please!
Get back, Tattle,
he wanted to say.
Get back before he hurts you!
But there was no time for that. Link rolled away from the arm of water, which had sprouted 5 fingers in a palm. The imp levitated, keeping his distance as he controlled the liquid monster like a puppeteer. As the water hand reached for him, it wept, dotting the clay ground with puddles. Link rolled away from its initial grasp, jumping free only to remove his mask and draw his bow. He was already panting.
Keep going. Keep going.
His mind was on high alert, taking in everything. He scanned the land with adrenaline as his guide. His arms and legs worked like machines, unable to pause and consider his full arsenal of weapons and masks. He could only move moment to moment, second by second.
Keep going. Keep going.
He pulled an arrow back against the string, and the blue gem glowed. His first shot was cold against the arid breeze as it struck the water hand's palm. It crackled into ice, and its second attempt to grab him failed. The translucent set of fingers became solid, fell, and shattered against the ground. But the water arm behind it was still liquid. The handless arm struck Link in the stomach like a sword's hilt. It knocked the air from him, flinging him against one of Ikana's rock walls, the edge of the battlefield. His shoulders and spine rang with pain as the impact of both solid rock and metal shield echoed in his bones. Link slid off the wall and face-planted, barely scrambling to his feet before the water arm grew another hand.
I need a break.
But the Skull Kid's attacks would not stop. He drew another ice arrow and fired, even as his back screamed in protest now.
Keep going, keep going.
The second hand froze as the first had, and Link fired another arrow to freeze the arm too, but the Skull Kid had expected that. Instead of earning a reprieve, the ground next to Link exploded. A thick column of earth had leapt free, striking him directly in the stomach. Once again, there was pain. Once again, he lost his breath. Once again, he arced through the air and crashed on his back. Once again, his ears rang and his head buzzed.
Keep going! Keep going!
But his body already struggled to listen. The Skull Kid was upon him, airborne and conjuring more fire. Link barely stood in time to avoid it, He was out of breath, and each step caused more pain to shoot through his body. He wasn't sure where he was running, only away. There was no time to see if the Skull Kid had turned to follow him or prepare another spell. Keep going, keep going! Somehow, he heard Tattle scream, but in his blurred vision, he hadn't noticed he was running toward the stream. Where's the imp? He felt fire, hot, behind him. Instinct took over, and he spun away from the flames, but the move caused him to stumble, and one boot landed in the water. A newborn tentacle took advantage immediately, glistening like the arm made of water had as it wrapped around his midsection. The liquid tentacle grew taller, bringing Link with it above the battlefield. The wind blew harder, and the clouds drew closer. Ikana Canyon fell away beneath him as dizziness took over. When had the battle even begun? Hadn't he been sitting on the cliff's edge in peace seconds ago? Surprise attack! The Skull Kid is going to kill me! Once he was high enough, the water tentacle tossed him aside. Link spun. In the blurred chaos, he realized he was level with the ancient castle of Ikana. He kept spinning, and he struggled to cling to a coherent thought as exhaustion and shock became anchors pulling him toward death. No, he thought. I can't die. Link reached into his bag for the Goron mask, but it wasn't there. He only found the others, and in the chaos of freefall, they fell away from him. His clumsy fingers didn't save a single one. The heavy weight of everything else in his bag continued bringing him downward. I'm going to die. Link fell and fell past the cliff, past the desolate battlefield, past the path he'd climbed up. I'm going to splat on the wooden pier. Then, something clicked. He wasn't sure what it was, some new wave of adrenaline, some hidden instinct long buried away ever since he entered Termina, or some freak rush of energy, but it came to him all at once. I'm the hero of time. He would not be beaten by the Skull Kid. He had work to do. Link reached into his bag and pulled out his hookshot, and suddenly his arms were machines again. The chain was just long enough to latch to the dead tree growing over the cliff. It locked in place, reversing Link's momentum to reel him upward, back to the battle. Link pressed the button to return the hook to him, and he landed just beneath the tree, once again in the makeshift arena. The Skull Kid had assumed Link was dead, heading to the shacks and colorful house, but the imp heard the hookshot, turning to see his battle had yet to be won. Link could see the Skull Kid's surprise despite the mask. The hero's face was stone. He drew his bow. Do you know who you're dealing with? Link asked, screaming across the blank wasteland. Do you really think you can beat me as I am now? Link echoed the words the imp had spoken during his first waking moment in Termina. Silent as ever, the Skull Kid rose skyward with more fire in his hands, but Link had already released his first fire arrow. The imp barely dodged it. Its edge grazed his sleeves. The Skull Kid tried to put out the flames caught on his clothes, but Link had fired another arrow. The hero took his chance and sprinted for his falling masks. Before the imp could recover, Link found the Zora mask and he became Mikau. Though the Skull Kid prepared more fire, Link launched his fin boomerangs up to meet the magic. The imp avoided one, but the second dug into his arm. The Skull Kid screamed. First blood had been drawn. The imp shot out his arms, and the ground obeyed, rising beneath Link. Thankfully, he'd retrieved his other masks by then, and the hero rolled into his Goron form, using the momentum to carry him upward. He rolled out of his ball once he was level with the Skull Child, who stared at him dumbfounded. Link switched masks while airborne and was a Deku scrub. His wooden snout produced green goop to coat the imp, and as Link fell back to the ground, it was Darmani who broke his fall. Link became a human again while the Skull Kid screamed with rage. The goop burned away, and the freed imp prepared for their true battle to begin. Link became a human again while the Skull Kid screamed with rage. The goop burned away, and the freed imp prepared for their true battle to begin. He flung out his arms in a motion familiar to Link, another fire spell. The hero applied the stone mask, and the Skull Kid retracted his fingers in confusion when the boy vanished. The half-conjured fireball missed. Link smiled as the heat washed over him harmlessly, but he made the mistake of taking a step backward too far. His foot splashed in the stream, ruining his invisibility's cover. The imp instantly turned to the sound and conjured another tentacle. This time, it swung down to try and crush him, and Link's stone mask offered no protection. He applied the Zora mask instead, and swam into the tentacle as it tried to recover, pulling himself along its length to swim back into the stream. It took the Skull Kid a good several moments to realize what had happened. The invisible boy had become a Zora out of nowhere. The imp dispelled the tentacle, and Link rolled out of the stream, already firing his fin boomerangs again. The imp dodged them. As furious as Link had ever seen him, the Skull Kid shot both hands out, and the hottest dark fire yet erupted outward. The imp flew closer to the ground, closing the distance between them as he threw purple meteor after meteor Link's way. The violet flames licked the land, burning it in a barrage of explosions. Link removed the Zora mask and became a boy, overwhelmed as fire spread chaotically. The flames cut him off from the huts, the stream, and the colorful house. The imp was pushing Link back toward the cliff. Soon, Link had nowhere else to run. He raised his shield as more fire reached to claim him. The magic curled off his Hylian relic. Still, the massive waves of heat were lethal. Even with a shield between him and death, Link's entire world became a purple inferno. Its force pushed him back through the dirt. The purple wrath grew jaws of flame, a dragon now, that lashed at the thin piece of metal safeguarding Link from oblivion. It pushed him closer to the cliff, threatening to topple him over. Then the fire stopped. Link fell forward, barely catching himself. He stumbled away from the ledge and into the scorched clay, blackened in all directions. The large, dark scar separated Link from the Skull Child, one on either end. Link kept his shield ready. For once, both had relented. The hero and imp caught their breath as the young storm grumbled above them. Ikana was blessedly still for a moment. Link allowed himself only one glance to the side. Tata was as close as she dared, mere feet away from the freshly scarred land. He wished she would hide. The Skull Kid reined in his heavy breathing next, only to move his arms in slow circles. Energy crackled around his fingertips. The strange dance was careful and hypnotic. Link could feel the air electrifying as the imp gathered his strength. Lightning. He remembered what had happened in the sewers of Clocktown. After the imp's spell struck him in the chest, Link's scar had activated, allowing him to redirect it at the Skull Kid and almost kill him. The boy could feel the imp's fear building alongside his dark magic. The Skull Kid was afraid it would happen again. So Link stood his ground, eyes set on Majora's chosen. Nehru, protect me, he prayed. Once the Skull Kid's spell was charged, he held it close. Fear restrained him a moment longer. Ikana Canyon held its breath, waiting for the deadly magic to either kill or enrage the hero. The imp poised his fingers finally, moving to strike. But at the last moment, he changed targets. The world seemed far away as Link turned his head. He watched the lightning dance like a mystical snake, zipping through the air with the speed and power of a god. The violet light's shadow pulsed against the clay, a heartbeat flooding over the burnt ground and those surrounding it. The lightning struck far away from Link, but it was as deadly, precise, and instantaneous as always. The neigh was shrill and high-pitched. Epona was blown back onto her hind legs, only for them to give out as she crashed to her side. The young mare slid through the dirt and shrieked, overwhelmed by the agony of her chest's open wound. She came to a skidding halt. The horse's head lolled slowly downward, resting finitely on the ground. A final buzz came from her lips, and then she lay still. Dust collected in a cloud around her. Link stared blankly at the corpse. No, he thought. I promised. His head rang. His mind was numb. Somewhere far off, he felt the Skull Kid flying at him. Somewhere far off, he felt the overwhelming heat of fire, fast approaching as Majora's darkness tried to kill him too. Somewhere far off, all of that was happening, but not here. No! Link fell to his knees, mouth agape. Suddenly, he was wrenched from his own mind. He was the imp. Link became the one behind the purple fire, running to strike down the hero once and for all. He watched himself knelt on the ground in his green tunic and hat. However, when his head turned to face the Skull Kid, his eyes were purple. Link's body raised its hand to stop the fire, and it ceased to exist immediately. Link watched from within the Skull Kid's mind, aghast as the dark magic turned his body into a puppet once more. The purple-eyed boy had anger etched into every line of his face. The Fierce Deity had been awakened. The Skull Kid realized he had made a grave mistake. All that remained was abject terror, a feeling that he currently shared with Link. This was the end. The dark puppet shot fire back at the masked child. The Skull Kid barely raised his hands in time to stop it and flew away, but Fierce Deity shot a powerful ball of flames to chase after him, and its force blew the imp back into a rock wall, knocking away his breath. The Skull Kid almost fell to the ground, but caught himself in time to keep flying.
No! Fly, 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 fly!
But the puppet sent a bolt of lightning after him. The Skull Kid gasped when it struck his stomach. The imp hurtled downward like a comet as the pain paralyzed him.
No!
The dark scorch had ripped through his clothes and scarred his skin. The Skull Kid crashed hard. He tried to stand, but he hurt too much, and the dark puppet was already there. Fierce Deity grabbed the imp by his collar and lifted him to be face to face with Majora's mask. The Skull Kid trembled in the purple-eyed boy's grasp. Link's face was twisted into a snarl.
No!
The imp screamed. He watched as the color in the puppet's hair faded, and in his tunic too. His hair was now as white as snow, and his clothes were as gray as the shacks behind them. The dark puppet threw the Skull Kid back into the clay, and Link was just as terrified, trapped in the mind of his victim. The imp backed away on his hands, unable to turn around as the dark puppet stood over him.
Please, please.
The Skull Kid trembled, tears welling in his eyes and sticking to the mask.
I didn't. It was just a stupid horse.
Silence.
The dark puppet screamed, though the voice was not Link's. Link and the Skull Kid were one as they trembled underneath the purple-eyed demon. Fierce Deity raised his hands, fire born in his palms.
No!
The Skull Kid shrieked, holding up his hands to protect himself.
Don't! Please!
His mind was racing, numb with terror. The imp threw Majora's mask off his face. The wooden mask rolled away harmlessly.
It was the mask! It wasn't me! Please don't kill me, please!
Fierce Deity did not listen. As he brought his hands down, he brought the fire with them.
Wait!
The Skull Kid thought desperately.
The little girl!
He could see her in that moment. She was in her white dress, stained with blood, but the purple flames enveloped his flesh, and the Skull Child became a human torch.
No!
He yelled, but the screams did him no good. Fierce Deity simply watched, purple eyes above a twisted smile. The imp's skin was afire. He had become a hot iron, melting away like wax as the darkness seared his clothing and destroyed his body. It worked its way down his throat to burn him from the inside too. Neither Link nor the Skull Kid had ever experienced such agony.
Please.
The Skull Kid thought as he rolled and tossed. Nothing put the fire out, as it seemed to melt his very bones. He looked up into the sky. The agony sliced white-hot through his mind. His hand reached out feebly for the clouds. He couldn't see. He couldn't find the giants that would help him. They had to. It hurt so bad.
Where are my friends?
Then, Link was snapped back to his own body. The imp had twitched his last, but the scar didn't turn off.
No.
The dark magic was still there, except now it shared his body with him.
No.
Every time he'd hidden away in the Skull Kid's mind while it cooled down, but now that the imp was dead,
No.
it would be there forever. Link screamed, grabbing both sides of his head as he wished the magic in his scar away.
Make it stop. Make it stop.
The Skull Kid's death had been a living nightmare as he'd burned alive, but this was even worse. He screamed, but it was a dark scream. the demon's scream. His eyes were still purple, and he couldn't return to his normal self.
Make it stop!
Tattle was horrified. She floated in place, eyes shining with tears as she watched the slaughter play out before her. Epona lay dead, killed by the lightning, and now the Skull Kid was dead. A burnt corpse. Link was shrieking for it to come to an end. Amidst it all, the fairy saw one other thing. Majora's mask. It lay alone, sitting in the dust by itself. Before she could retrieve it, Link shot out his arm in a random direction. Her. Tattle barely dodged the flames. They struck one of the shacks instead. The feeble building burst into flames, propelling the roof skyward as the rest of the wood collapsed. The debris became a plume of smoke rising miles into the sky. Link, still marred by his purple eyes, white hair, and gray tunic, approached the rest of the buildings, still shrieking as the dark magic flowed through his veins. Tattle kept her distance, flying instead toward Majora's mask.
I can end this all now,
she thought. She was halfway to it when something else grabbed it first, a purple-eyed bird. The horned owl clutched it in its claws and flew away, beating its great wings to travel fast.
No!
She went to fly after it, but she stopped when Link shrieked again. The boy released another ball of fire, and this one destroyed Shade's hut. It exploded as the last, wood and debris raining everywhere as the black wisps of heavy air climbed high. The fairy gasped, looking one last time at the owl disappearing over the horizon.
I can't leave Link alone.
Tattle abandoned the mask to confront her friend.
Link!
She screamed. The boy's head was still in agony.
Darkness, rage, pain, suffering.
He saw Epona lying dead on the ground. He saw Zelda dead in her bedroom. He saw Anju dead in the South Clock Town Plaza. He saw Navi lying dead in the grass. He saw the masked salesman lying dead in the log.
Dead. All dead.
He screamed again, lashing out his arms to send forth another monstrous blast of violet fire. A third shack burst, exploding as the others had. The wheel on the colorful music box home continued turning. Its music was a haunting backdrop to the carnage.
Link, you have to snap out of it!
Tattle screamed, flying as close as she dared. The boy's back was to her, bent in rage as fire curled at his fists.
You're going to kill the girl in the music box! Stop, please!
Link spun around, and when his eyes met hers, they were still purple.
No,
Tattle thought. It was her nightmare come to life. The boy raised his fingers. Dark magic rushed from them. It was a violet hand reaching for her, and Tattle flew to avoid it. But its fingers were too long. Link screamed again, this time holding his hands out before him, palms facing the sky. A great ring of purple fire surrounded him, growing larger as the fury within his scar pulsed with rage.
Make it stop! I need to get out of my own head!
Images of death kept racing across his mind, and each one added to the deep sadness, the deep emptiness. He flung his arms out again. The last shack exploded. This one caught fire and became a greater torch than the others, rising high enough to touch the sky. The ring of purple fire surrounding him grew larger and larger. The heat was immeasurable. Sweat beaded down his pale face.
I want to die!
Link screamed again. Tattle lay on the ground, cradling her blackened arm. It was stiff and burnt, and she couldn't stand or fly against the overwhelming pain. The barrier of purple fire was close enough for its heat to feel like a brand against her face. Even as she recoiled, she still reached out to try and stop him from destroying the music box house. But she was too far away and too hurt. Link summoned more waves of fire and spun to destroy the little girl's home.
Link.
The boy stopped, turning to kill whoever had spoken. His visitor's long blonde hair flowed over her shoulders, and her white dress was exactly as he remembered. The fire in Link's hand dissipated, but the ring of destruction remained, swirling around him in a violet storm. The Princess of Hyrule walked across the wasteland to confront him.
Zelda,
The possessed boy said. It's okay, Link. She passed through the ring of fire, unharmed, to join him at its center. The rest of the world stopped. Zelda was the only thing in existence. You don't have to fight anymore, she said. The war is over. You've won. Bit by bit, the purple maelstrom faded as Zelda finally reached him. The color returned to Link's tunic and hair, reflecting the peace in her blue, resolute eyes. You can put your sword away. There won't be any more dying. It's over. Zelda's hand gently squeezed his shoulder. It's you, Link stammered. She wrapped her arms around the hero and pulled him close. Link uncertainly returned the hug. A trick, a fake. It's the edge of Termina. But as he laid his hands on her back, he could feel her. He could feel her dress and her skin underneath. He could feel her long hair. He squeezed his eyes shut as his arms were full of her. You're here, he said, his voice shaking. You're really here? I'll always be here, Link, Zelda said. The boy held her so tightly, he wanted the moment to never end. Please, let me just hold you. I don't want to open my eyes and see what I've done. Let me pretend it didn't happen. Let's go back to Hyrule. But when he opened them, his arms were empty. Zelda was gone. Link stood in silent shock, his empty hands stretched out before him. He stared vacantly at the blank clay ground. The dry wind rolled across the land, stinging him bitterly.